Hello everyone and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Breaking Red, Understanding Threats Through Red Teaming. My name is Carol, author of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Joe Vest and James Tubberville, co-authors of our new 2-day Red Teaming course. If during the webcast you have any questions for Joe or James, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We will be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Joe.
Thank you, Carol. And thank everyone for joining us this Friday afternoon. Let's get into understanding red teaming. So what we want to talk about today is breaking red, understanding threats through red teaming. Red teaming is often misunderstood and not known as well as some of the other security testing processes and types. So what we want to today run through an introduction of red teaming, define this. It's very important that we actually have a definition of this to have a strong base to work from. Look at a few of the red teaming concepts out there that distinguish this from other security types. Work through why anyone would even want to run through a red team engagement. They can be a bit crazy. And compare and contrast to things you already know about. You already know about vulnerability assessments, penetration testing. Let's look at how this is different and unique. And part of that, we'll look at a tool that we've developed that is specifically designed to support red teaming activities. This will help put in context the uniqueness of red teaming. And finally, we're going to introduce a new SANS course, SEC 564, Red Team Operations and Threat Emulation, that both myself and James wrote. Let's get into this. So what is red teaming? Historically, it's a practice of attacking a problem from an adversarial viewpoint. And yes, that's a bit generic, but really what it is looking at problems or systems from the adversary's viewpoint, understanding what can they do to these negatively. It's important that red teams are not biased or have any preconceived notions about what is or is not possible. And the way this comes out are a handful of types of formats. These can be tabletop exercises. I like to call these the what-if scenarios. You have a team of people from the defending side and the attacking side to look at a problem. Now this particular webcast, we're focusing on cyber operations, but red teaming can go much further than that. But for this context, let's focus on the cyber side. So from a tabletop exercise, you can look at an organization who wants to find out what a bad guy can do to them. Using an experienced red team to having an open conversation through what-if scenarios, you'll be surprised at what can be learned and gained without ever touching a keyboard. An experienced red team can really help shed light on what a threat an adversary can do. You also have physical attacks, and yes, I mentioned we're talking cyber operations, but red teaming has a big space in the physical attack space. And when I say physical, I mean breaking into buildings, gaining access to hardware, or generally just accessing a facility without permission. And these are very, very good enablers on the cyber side of things. Physical attacks might be the way that you bypass the firewall, for example. You're able to gain access to a facility, maybe place some hardware in there that enables cyber operations to continue. This leads into the human attacks as well. More pieces that support this. Social engineering. Social engineering can help support the physical attacks, talking your way into a facility, or on the other side, possibly a cyber attack through phishing or enticing someone to click or open a malicious email. Both of these are enablers to support a red team exercise. We get into the cyber exercises, red versus blue exercises. This is definitely a unique area for red teaming. And what these are geared towards are having red, the bad guys, versus blue, the good guys, if you will, to be put against each other with the goal of training blue teams. You have the red attacking blue, blue defending their systems, and it allows an environment that's safe to attack in very aggressive ways sometimes and really stimulate and engage blue in ways they normally don't get to practice. And finally, when you look at these full cyber operations against production environment, this is where many times people think of red teaming, breaking in to a network and a system and doing the bad things that you would wish to do. What's important here on a red teaming side is a full operation against a production environment. And yes, production is important. A solid, experienced red team has the capability and the skill set to attack a full network and a full system production environment safely, while at the same time delivering high fidelity threat representation. In other words, they're able to act, look, and feel like a bad guy against a production environment, and that's extremely valuable to an organization to see how they can withstand real threats. So, in order to understand this, we need to have a definition. So, to keep this simple, we want to have a fundamental meaning so we can all go to the same point of what a red team and red teaming is. So, red teaming is the process of using tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, to emulate a real-world threat with the goals of training and measuring the effectiveness of people, processes, and technologies used to defend an environment. What does that mean? What this is red teaming is a process. That's important. It is a process that is used to emulate a bad guy, some sort of threat, under the circumstances of a scenario with specific goals. So a process of threat emulation that has specific goals. These goals are designed to attack a system to measure the effectiveness of the people, processes, and technology. What does that mean? That's security operations as a whole. So basically, red teaming is used to emulate a threat to understand security operations as a whole. Who does that? That's your red team. And simply put, a red team is just an independent group that challenges an organization's effectiveness. In other words, they're an unbiased group that has no preconceived ideas of what is or is not possible, and they are there to exercise scenarios and become a threat. In addition to defining red teaming, what we have is there's many terms that red teams use that are sometimes used in other areas, but often exclusive to red teaming. I find myself throwing these terms out too often in groups that don't understand them or don't regularly use them. So I wanted to help define these, and I want to pick a few out that are unique and interesting. Command and control, or C2. This is a term I throw around a lot and sometimes realize that it's not always well known. But basically, command and control is the influence an attacker has over a system. And what does that mean? This means how can the threat get a system to do what they're bidding. This could be something as simple as, let's say, Metasploit's interpreter. It could be Cobalt Strike Beacon, it can be PowerShell Empire, or it can be custom tools as well, which is very common in red teaming. But that is not all. Simply by using Metasploit's interpreter, that does not mean it's your command and control. The C2 is the entire process, all the components. This would mean your IP addresses, the domain names, redirections, the path you take, the protocols you use. Maybe you're running this over HTTP, maybe you're running it over DNS, but the entire process that you design is your command and control. These are typically built in multiple layers. Get into indicator of compromise, or an IOC. This is a term that you often hear from the forensic side of things. Forensics analysts will look and figure out all the indicators, or basically these are the artifacts. These are artifacts left behind from a threat's actions. This could be something such as a file left behind, configuration changes, registry changes, anything that would leave behind a trace that an adversary or a threat took an action. This is important because a fundamental piece of red teaming is managing indicators. When you're doing emulation of a specific threat, you model your actions after that threat, which means the indicators that that threat leaves behind or does not leave behind is important. So the managing of IOCs is a fundamental process of red teaming. Operational impact. This is one that I don't typically see outside of red teaming. And this is the effect of a goal that a red team is working through. In other words, a red team is not there to, let's say, take over a Windows domain. That's typically not a goal that's driven by red teaming. That might be a means to a goal, and owning a domain could be important in order to stage themselves for their operation. But the operational impact is, what are you doing that negatively affects that environment or that organization? The impact is the effect that the red team will use as their goal. In other words, let's say the impact could be, we need to steal a terabyte of data, and we're going to exfil this information out of some sort of channel that the red team has established. Well, the impact allows the organization to measure and monitor, are they able to detect, can they see this information leaving, and understand what impact is felt, and the red team is able to execute that through their goals. We get into threat emulation, and this is very important. Most all red team engagements use threat emulation as part of their design. Sometimes these are generic and just have some sort of generic threat, but often they are specific threats, specific adversaries. Perhaps some threat intelligence has shown that XYZ actor has these capabilities. Well, a red team will use those and design an engagement around that. Let's dig into this a bit more. Threat emulation is the process of mimicking a specific threat. But what's important is you're trying to become a representative threat actor. In other words, you want to mirror and monitor and look like that threat as best as possible. This means, unlike some other security tests, which might be get in as however you can, attack, exploit everything, you are going to be bound and limited by the rules and capabilities of the threat that you're portraying. If you're portraying a simple threat, you may not get to use any advanced techniques. And on the other side, if you're portraying an advanced threat, maybe you have to develop custom tools to actually emulate that threat appropriately. So getting into why would you red team, this is common, especially with organizations who spend lots of time doing vulnerability assessments, pen testing, doing what they think is good, and those are good tasks. But eventually, why do you want a bad guy to attack your network? There's a lot of fear in having a red team come in and attack, especially a production network, thinking a red team is going to come and destroy and tear down the network. But what's important is, when you do engage a red team, especially an experienced red team who understands how to balance the fidelity and realism of an attack and the safety that's needed to conduct this in a production network is important. But you can measure the effectiveness of the people, process, and technology. And that's what's really, really important. In other words, security operations as a whole, most security testing focus the technology side. We're testing to see if you can get past a firewall. We're testing an application. We're looking to see if you've done patches to see if there's exploits available. But a security operations as a whole is not just technology. It's the people who operate those systems and the processes they've designed. Those are very, very important. Red teams can help engage and stimulate those under various scenarios to see how effective they are. Additionally, training and measuring blue teams, this might be one of the most important aspects of a red team. Blue teams and defenders who do not practice, they usually are weak or they are not prepared for a real attack. Red teams allow the blue teams to be stimulated in a way to them so they can access their processes and engage and attempt to defend and get better. And finally, red teaming helps you look at specific threats and threat scenarios. This is really important when it comes to, let's say a new threat has been discovered. Tomorrow in the news, something comes out, XYZ attack is possible, and these new threat actors are using that. Well, a red team can take that intelligence information, craft a specific scenario, and engage your network to find out how well you can defend against that. This works great at looking at 0 days and 0-day type processes to see how effective your security defenses are. And this is a good graphic of how red teams, what they do and why you should be red teaming. I speak to organizations all the time, and they tell me what is possible. For example, they tell me 5 people in accounting have access to this system, and they say it with high confidence and understanding that this is the reality. And I'll say, well, I look at it from a red perspective. You're saying, okay, that's what it should be. But what is it really? Really, it's 20 people across the organization have access to the system. And this is an example with an accounting system, but this can be anything. This can be access to sensitive data. It can be access to all your secret sauce. But the balance between what should be and what is a fundamental reason why you should red team. Looking to see if you're compliant within your patch management system is great, but knowing how your operations work to know what should be and what is, it can be more important. Let's jump into red teaming versus other security testing type. This is where a lot of you will find some familiarity. What I'm depicting here is vulnerability assessments, pen testing, and red teaming. As you move down on this inverted triangle, you're seeing the depth of an assessment. In other words, how far do you go deep to look into a system or systems? Horizontally, we're looking at how wide, so how broad are you looking at this? Now, I have this drawn as a triangle, but it does not mean there's a direct relationship that vulnerability assessments lead to pen testing, leads to red teaming. These all can be performed completely independent of each other. But when you look at vulnerability assessments, you're looking at something that's broad scale. You want to analyze and find as many vulnerabilities as you can across a large number of systems, perhaps an entire enterprise. But you don't go very deep. So the findings that you come back, they're relative to that piece of equipment that you look at. It does not necessarily give you context of overall organizational security. Pen testing goes a little bit more, so it's a little narrower, but it's still pretty broad. For instance, pen testing commonly looks for all the ways that you can compromise a Windows domain. Perhaps you want to look for code execution through various systems, maybe some memory corruption, or whatever flaws may exist to gain access to a system. But then again, it's looking at it in context of the exploitability of these vulnerabilities. And finally, red teaming, it's very, very focused, and it's operational focused. Finding flaws and exploits are just merely means to an end. Red teaming goal is to look at how an organization can be effective negatively in, so for example, a bank. A bank does banking. They manage and process money. If a bank can no longer manage and process money, they can't be a bank. A red teaming would have goals geared around taking that ability from that bank. Let's look in a little bit more depth. So vulnerability assessments. This is your security hygiene. There's nothing wrong with this, and it's very important to do. I tell my kids to brush their teeth every day, make sure they've done this. But compared to red teaming, this is just hygiene. This is looking with the goal of to generate a list of prioritized vulnerabilities. That's the goal of vulnerability assessments. Context towards organizational impacts it's difficult to take a vulnerability assessment report and put that in terms of organizational risk. It's possible, but you're starting very, very low at each individual component level. As compared to looking at responses to the organization to measure the impacts and responses to the organization, how a red team would go. Penetration testing, it's a little deeper. Some people call these just security assessments, pen testing, ethical hacking. It has a variety of names, but bottom line with pen testing, the focus is on identification of vulnerabilities which are exploitable. In other words, it's matching up the level of vulnerabilities to what risk does exploiting that work come. That's where the risk comes in. A good way to look at this is go back to the pirate and ninja example. So what are pirates? They're loud, they're boisterous, they can attack from far away, but if they come after you, they're going to get in. Think of that in pen testing. They come at you with everything they've got, and you know they're coming. they're right there in your face and they take over and they win. On the other side, look at a ninja. Ninjas are stealthy, they're quiet, they will build custom tools, and they're willing and able to wait for their opportunity. And their target is not necessarily compromising and taking over the entire village or so, but maybe stealing the crown jewel or assassinating someone. They are very targeted in their goals, and they directly impact that organization. That would be more in tune with red teaming. And I put application security testing because it's a unique area. So application security testing is very similar to somewhere in between penetration testing and vulnerability assessments. The difference is there's a unique skill set required for application security, but bottom line, it still determines to identify vulnerabilities and look at risk of exploitability. Still not a direct impact. For example, a red teamer, when they're doing an assessment against a system, they may attack an application, but it's just going to be a means to an end. Perhaps they exploit a single flaw, use it to pivot into another system. In no sense can you use that identification of a single flaw as a comprehensive look at that application. It was just merely a means to an end. So bottom line, this is where we're getting into some real differences and key differences in red teaming. Red teaming is not about vulnerabilities and exploitation. Now, vulnerabilities and exploits may be used and probably will be used during an engagement, but they are not the end. They are just merely means to an end. Impacts and understanding how a threat can negatively impact an organization is what you want to look at. Looking at security operations as a whole is where this is done. There's a lot of time, energy, money spent to defend a network. And looking at it from a vulnerability assessment side and a penetration testing side sometimes misses those operational level impacts. Understanding how not just the technology, but the people and processes affect security can be very, very important to look at, and red teaming can do that. If I had to pick a single statement that represents red teaming, this is what it would be: the sword that hones the shield. I first heard this from Raphael Mudge. He's the author of Armitage and Cobalt Strike, both red teaming tools. He's a excellent person to follow and listen to in the red teaming community and world. He builds great tools that directly support red teaming. He actually claims that he did not come up with this statement, but I first heard it from him, so I credit him. So yes, red teaming is the sword that hones the shield. In other words, it is the attack that's going to help improve and improve security defenses. In the in the 60s, there's a project called Project Red Baron, and it was designed after Vietnam War, and it analyzed and realized that combat pilots were not as effective as they were in prior wars. At the end of this review and study, it was determined that a combat pilot who had at least 10 combat missions was much more likely to survive. So how do you have 10 combat missions and survive? It's very risky, and this is where an idea of red teaming comes into play. By using red versus blue exercises, which the Air Force does this now, you can apply the same thing to the cyber operations side. Red versus blue exercises allows a blue team to be stimulated and engaged so that they can practice and train. Very, very important part of red teaming. Without practice, a blue team or the defenders that people spend lots of money on, they're at the mercy of a real adversary attacking their system for practice, or they're at the mercy of just hoping that what they've done will work. Red teams really allow them to engage a realistic threat. Let's move into threat scenarios here. So it's a big graphic, but it's extremely helpful in understanding the concept of building and designing threat scenarios when you're working with a red team. So normally when you're doing red teaming, you don't just, it's not about penetrating and breaking into a system. It's about designing a scenario that has specific goals. And in this particular, the way we're depicting with this graphic is these are initial access vectors. These vectors can be argued that through intelligence, through prior knowledge, that these are possible. And this is important when you're designing a threat scenario. For example, a true insider. A true insider, no matter if they're an employee, partner, called a spy, they have access to systems. If they wish to do negative things, it's highly feasible that they would be successful. You have the unwitting insider, which is the person that the adversary uses to become an insider, such as through a phishing attack, for example. And then you have this outsider. Now this is where we spend most of our time doing assessments and testing. Think the external pen test. We spend a lot of time here. It is a feasible access vector, but when we spend all of our time and energy focusing on this, what are we missing? We're missing the chance to see what a threat can do, and we're observing a threat's capability through a narrow lens. I'll come back to that in a minute. Physical intrusion, you can use physical access to enable cyber. In other words, have the cleaning guy break into the server room and implant some pieces of hardware that enables remote access, or possibly even a supply chain attack to where you can modify hardware and software. Perhaps you can modify the software update process through an organization that new software with malware is delivered. And the reason these are important is these can help shape your threat scenario. If you look at the quote at the bottom, "Yeah, but we let you in," this is something common for both pen testers and red teamers to face all the time. Many people say, they use the attitude, "Hey, hacker boy, let's see what you've got." And they put all the shields and walls up, and the goal is to see if someone can break in. And that can help, and sometimes it is helpful to see what an adversary can do if they can break in. But what about the assessments to say, what happens if they do break in? If we spend all our time as this outsider and test the possibility for someone to gain access, we will never understand what happens when they do. And this leads into one of our threat models that is probably my favorite threat model, the assume breach threat model. What this is it's a scenario, as you're designing a threat scenario, to say the threat has some level of access. This could be from any one of those 5 vectors that we mentioned. They're an insider, they've gained access through some remote exploit, they've physically broken into your network and enabled it. And this is extremely helpful, and this is one thing that distinguishes red teams from others is the scenario. You want to design a scenario so you can tell the story. One of the most important pieces that people care about is what's bolded here. It's more efficient use of limited resources. You only have so much time, money, energy, staff to execute these assessments. Red team engagements can take longer than others, depending on how you design the scenario. Here's a good example I had. I had a 3-week-long engagement at one point, and it was, per the client, it was adamant that we attack from the outside and come in from the outside. Initial recon showed there was web app and potentially had some flaws for remote access. This was not enough. The potential was not enough. So I spent almost 2.5 weeks attacking and breaking into this web app. You're talking about a 3-week-long engagement. The operational goals and the goals of this engagement were not to see if you could break into a web app. There were operational impacts on the back end that were important. After 2.5 weeks, I successfully gained access through the web application, and I had less than a week to actually conduct and perform the operational impacts. If in this case we were able to use an assumed breach model, we could have quickly identified a potential vector for attack, this web app, and then jump straight into the network and actually achieve and work on the goals that were important. So it's very, very important to focus on operational impacts instead of seeing if someone can just break into a network. Don't assume red teaming is the same as penetration testing. If you want to find out if someone can break into a network and do things, that's a perfect area for penetration testing. So let's jump into a tool that will help illustrate red teaming and show some differences. So there's a tool that myself and another person on my team, Andrew Charles, wrote last year. We've been using this technique for a while, but we finally put it together as a tool. The tool is called Domain Hunter, and what its goal is to look for expired domains, to check those domains for reputation, to see if they've been classified, such as through Blue Coat, to see if they're known malware, and to look if these domains are potentially useful for command and control campaigns. This will make more sense when I go through the tool. So let me show you this right here. So pull up the help document here on Domain Hunter. It's a simple Python script, but what it's going to do is it's going to, like I said, look for expired domains, look for some categorization, and archive.org history. Basically, look at if these domains are good candidates to support your command and control campaign, so that you can look and feel like a threat you're trying to mirror. For instance, let's say I want to do a campaign. I'll just return 100 results, but I want to query, maybe dog is important. This campaign, dog is a helpful piece, so I'll query this out. So we'll run this. It's going to do some searches for queries, and it's going to return a list of domains that are potential candidates for me. Now in this case, the tool does return this in a nice little grid, but this is not as helpful as the HTML report that it sends out. So let's look at this from the HTML report. Much easier to look at. Okay. So this report here is part of, this is the HTML version of the report I just showed. And what's important about this is now I'm trying to build up my command and control campaign. I can look to see, is there a candidate? For example, here's cuddledogs.com. I look up here at birth and entries, this is when archive.org or the Wayback Machine has seen this. So basically these are history of this website that's known about. If I looked at Cuddle Dogs, it was first seen in 2015. There are 7 different versions of this. In this case, these top-level domains, so right here in this column, top-level domains are available. So there's a few that could be good. In this case, Blue Coat shows this uncategorized. And what that means is that there's no category. So in this case, you probably would not choose this if that's what you needed. Site categorization is an extremely useful way to bypass many content filtering devices. So maybe I wouldn't choose that. So if I scroll down here and I try to find something that looks a little bit better, I see here's one that's been classified as Society Daily Living. Perhaps this basicdogs.se is a good use. But what this tool is doing is giving me information about expired domains, basically domains that already have history. So I am trying to build a command and control campaign to look like a specific threat. And this tool helps find that out. For example, right here, this one is malicious. If I went and registered this domain, I'm already classified as malicious. Probably not what I want to do. So that's what this tool is doing. It's specifically designed to help find command and control. And just for quick help, it does have a WatchGuard for reputation of that domain. Quick link to Namecheap if you choose to use Namecheap to register your domain. It's just what happens. I happen to be using, so it helps. And then a link over to archive.org if you'd like to see some of the old snapshots that they have captured to see what the site looks like. And if you notice, this tool is not doing any sort of exploitation. It's not attacking anything. It's not the super elite hacker tool. It is designed specifically with a red teaming in mind to help build out your command and control. So what's helpful for, how would you use this in a campaign? How does this support a command and control campaign? You can register an identified domain, so it allows you to help find something. And you can do more than one. You can search for many as part of your overall campaign. You can use this actually to configure your domain directly, or you can use it for redirection to maybe obfuscate some of your traffic. What I really like to do if I use HTTP protocol, I like to use SSL TLS on this and actually get a valid certificate. Let's Encrypt works great for that. This whole process can actually be automated through various APIs. But now you can go register a domain that's got history, that's categorized the way you want, get a valid SSL certificate on there, and then you can go out and install and configure your command and control. It allows you to look and feel very, very much like a valid threat. It's very, very useful to help with a red team campaign. Other interesting things you can do, and this is where you put your red teaming threat hat on to see how to act and emulate like a bad guy, is you can take these domains, register, and hold on to them. Create a fake site so that they look and feel, they're categorized, Google crawls them, it looks fine. And then when it's time to perform your attack, you repurpose them, perform your command and control, do your attacks, and when you're done with them, return them to what I call maintenance mode. So this is an example of a tool specifically designed for red teaming. And during the actual course I'll speak about in a minute, these are the ways we look at the tools and how we build out our exercises in the new course so that you can look to see how to model and emulate a threat. Not necessarily your normal hacking tools, although there are some of these. You're looking more at how do you utilize all these tools or custom tools to emulate a threat. So, takeaways and conclusions. Next time you speak about red teaming, these few bullets can help. Keep it simple and easy, but basically, red teaming is not about vulnerabilities. Red teaming is about measuring and observing operational impacts. This is geared mainly towards looking at the effectiveness of the people, processes, and technology. Basically, red teaming allows you to look at security operations as a whole to see how effective time, money, energy, staff, etc. have been spent. How well can you truly defend your network from a bad guy who wishes to do harm to your organization? And an organization exists not to be secure. They exist to do what they do. The only groups that exist to be for security are us in the security industry. Everyone else, they are selling their widgets. They're doing banking. They offer other services. But security is just a piece that they must deal with. With that, red teaming also is great for red versus blue exercises to train the blue. This is probably one of the most benefits you can gain from red teaming, is to help let your teams practice and get better. You don't want your defenders to get better only when real-world attacks occur. Give them practice outside of that. And finally, red teaming is based on goals. It's goal-driven through threat emulation and threat scenarios. So with that, that's a quick overview of red teaming. There are many, many more aspects to explore and understand, and this which leads into our new red teaming course. In this quick conversation, I've only been able to scratch the surface of what red teaming is and how to use it. But we have a new course written by myself and James, SEC 564, Red Team Operations and Threat Emulation. I'm very, very excited about this two-day course. It is packed with lots of information. And the way this information covers, it goes all the way from the security red teaming operations side, in other words, all the pieces and parts needed to design, configure, manage, operate a red team, all the way down to the operator side, so the person sitting behind the keyboard to understand how to do threat emulation, run tools, design, build their custom tools. We cover the entire gamut. It is jam-packed with information over these 2 days. And with that, want more? Look on the SANS website. You can get lots more details information about the new upcoming course. We do have our first beta course that I'm very excited for. It's in Atlanta on April 6th and 7th. So just a few weeks away, we will be debuting this course in Atlanta for the first time. We are planning many, many more this year, and once they're on the calendar, SANS website will have them out there. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Carol, and open it up for even more questions.
All right, well, thanks for that great presentation. It looks like there's some questions ready for the Q&A. James, I'm not sure if you've answered all of them or if you'd like me to read them aloud. What are your thoughts on that?
So I've answered all but the last one, and it's a repeat of the others. I was just going to go and copy and paste the answer to it. But in short, someone asked about the difference between a couple of the SANS courses. Personally, I've been through a lot of the SANS courses. I would recommend them all. It really depends upon what your future is as far as the offensive versus the defensive side of your function or your job. In the end, every course I've ever attended, and I think this is pretty unanimous across all of us, they're all great courses. They're very informative. They provide lots of detail, and in the end, they're really enjoyable as well. So in the end, the recommendation for the course would be completely dependent upon what your personal goal is moving forward. We had a couple of questions on Domain Hunter. I posted the links out in the Q&A. We have threatexpress.com, which is our blog site, which we have write-ups on Domain Hunter, how it was written, some interesting things about the tool itself, and we've also got a link to the public release for GitHub. And there's a couple of additional ones popping in now.
Yeah, so threatexpress.com, great place to see Domain Hunter for sure. Install and configure, I will follow up on what James mentioned in the install and configure command and control, or C2. This is an interesting topic. We have a great section in the new course, and I'm not trying to divert this to say, hey, take the course, but yes, the course covers this information on how to design and configure this. There are great blog articles. I mentioned Raphael Mudge, the author of Cobalt Strike. Now, his is specific to a specific tool and geared towards that, but he has great information as well on configuring C2. But basically, at a high level, when you're configuring C2, you're designing, you need to understand what threat you are, how to emulate that threat, so that you know that that's what they need to look like.
All right. Here's one that came in. Oh.
Kind of popped in here. It's a CYA collection techniques do you recommend? In the end, there's multiple methods of doing collection. There's the automated type. Everything that you're doing should be captured within the system in which you're operating, and that's an automated collection. But the issue with that is there's not a lot of deterministic collection behind that. So what is that operator's intent? What is that executor's intent? Whether they're red or blue, that's something that an automated tool is never going to get. So there needs to be a combined capability from both a automated collection as well as a manual entry. And you're never going to be able to get outside that. And that's one of the things that we actually discuss and talk to and teach within the upcoming 564. So if you've got a ton of questions about the collection methodology, I'd recommend attending the course or making a purchase and then going through the course in depth. It's extremely beneficial. I can tell you we've constructed the course from start to finish to enable you to do a full-on red team engagement, to include the planning, the construct, the installation, configuration, and management of the course. So.
And I've got another question here. Are there plans to have the course online or in person? This will be on demand. Just as I said, stay tuned for future courses. Stay tuned for that as well. Right now, the beta course in Atlanta on 6th and 7th will be the debut, and after that, many more will be scheduled.
And then there's also a question on purple teaming. How is that related to red teaming? Purple teaming is a combination of the red team and blue team and some of the penetration testing aspects where you're going in an assistive mode where you're not only performing the red team actions, but you're walking the defenders through how they can better prepare and protect and defend their environment against potential threats. So that's a lot of stuff covered under the red team concept itself. However, a lot of people like to refer to that as purple teaming because they're doing the hand-holding process versus the red team with the follow-up. It's a joint effort, usually a right seat, left seat type of engagement.
And I'm looking at this, can I safely say we're looking at exploiting a process found during a pen test. I would still not say this has not gone into red teaming. When you're just looking at exploitability of single issues, the big distinguisher for red teams, you have red versus blue training, but outside that, if you're looking at this operationally, you're looking at operational impacts. How does a threat negatively impact an organization? That is where red teaming comes into play. You're looking at what is it possible. You can actually perform an entire red team engagement, successfully achieve your goals, and never do something such as gain domain admin access. Many pen tests require or want you to go and gain domain access, pilfer the entire network for whatever you can find. Red teaming is going to be more, like I mentioned, the ninja approach. It's going to be stealthy, targeted, and goal-oriented. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Well, do you have any closing thoughts or?
I'm just extremely excited for this. The red teaming is still fairly new concepts, and lots of people are getting into this. I look forward to this course and how it grows, and I hope to see, if I don't see any of you attend a course, I hope to see you guys attend sometime this year. If not red teaming course, there's many other great SANS courses out there.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Joe and James, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, you can visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.